Hey everybody, welcome to my talk, Blending Scrum and Kanban to Create an End-to-End Agile Enterprise. This is going to be about a 9 or 10 minute overview of the core content that I've submitted for the Agile 2011 conference. My name is Mike Kottmeyer. I am an Agile coach with Leading Agile. You guys can see my contact information if you'd like to get a hold of me sometime after the presentation. You can find me at my blog, leadingagile.com. You can find me on Twitter, you can find Leading Agile on Facebook, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. So a little bit of the background behind this talk. This is a result, almost kind of like a case study, if you wouldn't, if you will, of a engagement that I've been doing for about the last 5 months with a company here in Atlanta. And on the first day of the engagement, I walk in, and the CEO happened to be in town, and he asked me, he says, "What can I do to support this initiative?" And so what I told him is, I want you to hold the team accountable for becoming predictable. At the end of the day, if the teams are not accountable, Agile in the enterprise is almost a house of cards. The teams have to be able to make and meet commitments. But once the teams get good at making and meeting commitments, the goal is for the enterprise to be able to respect their capacity, to basically understand what it is that they can feed into the system and reasonably expect to get done. So it's throughput at the enterprise level, but constrained by the capacity of the team. And their CTO had one of the best lines during one of our training courses, and he says, basically, if all we do is find another way to track activity, we're not going to be successful. Sometimes at the team level, even doing user stories that add value into the software feel like activity to the organization. What we've got to do is to figure out a way to get value out at the enterprise level, and that's really what this talk is about. We're going to try to put some constructs in place that allow us to scale basic concepts in Agile and focus on enterprise value. Because at the end of the day, Agile is all about delivering value to the organization. In order to do that, we have to have some language around what exactly is value and how are we going to represent it. And so I'm going to introduce a couple of conventions here that I use quite often in my coaching engagements. There's no necessarily standard language around this, but we're going to give it our best shot. So epics are collections of features, typically 1 to 3 months in duration. Epics can span releases. Epics span more than one team. And these are the things that in my world that your CEO is going to care about. That's how we're using the word epic here. Features we're using to describe things that you're going to build into the product that are smaller than epics, typically 2 to 4 weeks in duration. I'd like to have features contained within releases. If I can, I'd like to have features contained within a single team. These are the things that the product owner cares about. And then user stories are the smallest increment of value, typically less than a week. User stories are contained within the sprint. And these are the things that engineering management cares about. These are the things that the team is going to deliver every week or 2 or 3 throughout the Scrum process. So what I want to do is I want to start with the idea of story maps, because story maps visually show the relationship between user stories and business value. So we start our story map with the identification of larger, more strategic organizational goals, and then we decompose those epics into these features that add value into the product. Ultimately, we're going to decompose features into user stories that are thin slices of value added into the system. So how do we use this to become predictable? Well, basically what we do is we take the user stories and we estimate them in relative units, story points, if you will. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually sum those story points up at the feature level to get a relative size of the feature, and then ultimately roll up the features to get a relative size of the epic. But our goal isn't to build everything that we can possibly think of. Our goal is to build the smallest subset of the system possible to deliver the value of the epic. So what we do is we continuously evaluate the story map to determine the minimally marketable feature. And so in this case, there's a subset of the user stories that will deliver the value in the feature that will ultimately realize the value in the epic. So when we look at just the velocity associated with the user stories that are in the MMF, our features become smaller and ultimately our epics become smaller, and we're able to deliver value earlier in the life cycle. So now think about it. We're still primarily at the team level having this conversation, but minimally marketable features are going to feed the prioritization of our sprint planning. So we'll take the highest value user story in the feature and we'll move that into our story backlog. We'll take the next highest value user story in that feature. I'd like to see if we can get MMFs of completed features out the door, but if the user story in the next feature happens happens to be of higher priority, that's fine. Go ahead and move it in. In this particular case, the planned velocity for the team is 6 points this particular sprint. So now we go through the process of decomposing user stories down into tasks. And then, again, typical Scrum stuff. We'll estimate the tasks in actual hours to try to get some idea of what the team can actually deliver within the sprint. So in this case, our planned story point velocity is 6. Our planned estimated hours is 98. And then, again, we move tasks across the board, focusing on getting the highest value user stories across first. And then as we move the tasks across the board, our user stories complete until we have everything that we've agreed to in the sprint actually done. And so from a metrics perspective, we burn down hours to make sure that the sprint is on track. So within the sprint, we burn that 96 down, hopefully to 0. Then we claim the 6 points. The next sprint, our velocity might be 8. Next sprint, it might be 5. But over time, we basically want those numbers to become predictable. So when the release is ready, the team's completed the highest priority user stories against the highest priority features against the highest priority epics. And then everybody down at the team level is focused on delivering against the highest priorities of the actual enterprise. So that's basically a team level Scrum install. And so what happens is when you engage an organization, often you'll start with one team, then you'll move to the next and the next and the next. And everybody's got this idea of how their user stories map up into features, map up into epics. Everybody's tracking their work on storyboards of some sort or another. And everybody is keeping track of metrics around the release, around the sprint, and then looking at velocity over time. And the goal is for the teams to get good at being able to meet commitments sprint over sprints. I like to call that calling your shots, and then basically establishing a stable velocity. I want to be predictable, and I want to be able to make and meet commitments. Those are the key things at the team level that I'm trying to put in. But how does team predictability lead to enterprise predictability? Because as an enterprise, I don't necessarily care at the rate at which I can deliver user stories. I care the rate at which I can deliver epics. So team predictability is one thing, but companies need to be able to track value at the epic level. We need a mechanism to make sure that features that span multiple product teams are treated with the same sense of awareness as single product features. And all of our day-to-day activities, those user stories that we're delivering and the tasks that we're delivering need to clearly map to enterprise objectives. We need to build product as one integrated organization. So how we pull this off is that we basically install a 3-tier system. At the team level, typically I'll do Scrum. You could just as easily do Kanban at the team level if that makes sense to you. I tend to start with Scrum. That's usually where people engage, and pretty simple and straightforward to get your head around. What I'll do often is wrap that in a tier 2, basically a feeder system that I'm going to move features through that I'll use Kanban for. Typically I'll put like an analysis, design, build, test, deploy kind of structure in at tier 2, and then at tier 3 up at the enterprise level, where the epics move through, I'll use something typically like out of Agile Unified Process or just Unified Process Inception, Elaboration, Construction, Transition. So we're going to talk about how these 3 layers feed each other over time. But basically what we're doing is we're using Kanban to create a pull system across the entire portfolio that's actually limited or is limited by your actual capacity. So the velocity of the team creates opportunities to pull work across the 2-tier board, and then the throughput of the features across the tier 2 board creates the ability to pull epics across the higher board. So we use Scrum and velocity and all that kind of stuff at the team level. We use all the performance stuff that Scrum helps us get better at the team level to facilitate improvement of process up at the higher order levels. So if you just want to get a quick idea of how this looks, epics move into inception. They might move into elaboration, where that results in features that move down into analysis, move into design. Those features result in spikes that the team gets. Those spikes result in user stories. Those user stories get broken down and then move across the board. So as we have space in the tier 2 and tier 3 Kanbans, we can move epics and features in, and those epics and features will ultimately feed the backlog down at the Scrum team. So as the tasks move across the board, from the team's perspective, they're just doing user stories and spikes, and then the product product owner, the product owner teams, the executive leadership is basically feeding the system based on the team's available capacity. When they have space in their backlog, when they have space in a release, those higher level items will actually feed the team. So again, from a team's perspective, all we're doing is we're thinking about user stories and tasks and getting it done and increasing our velocity. And then as product owners and executives in the organization, we're feeding that system to make sure that the teams always have well-populated, well-groomed backlog from which to work on. And so at the team level, velocity metrics derive predictability. That's how we're going to inspect and adapt and improve and get better. But at the program and product level, lean metrics become more meaningful. I can have velocity at the feature level. I can do that if I want. But in more complex organizations, personally, I think that some of the lean metrics, cycle time, lead time, and such, become more interesting. And at the enterprise level, the lean metrics are also the more interesting metrics as well. So we want to look for things like the rate at which we complete features and epics, the average time to complete features and epics, and how long things wait before we start. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And so for the talk that I've proposed, we're going to take some of these things, we're going to break them down into more detail and talk about the mechanics of implementation and some of the things that have happened around this. But this is pretty much how I am looking at almost every Agile transformation, large-scale Agile program portfolio management thing that I'm involved with right now. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You got my email, you got my phone number, and then you can find me on all my online properties. But anyway, looking forward to continuing the conversation and look forward to any feedback that you might have on this brief presentation. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.